March 8th, 1944. North Atlantic. 2:47 a.m. 5 men in a rubber dinghy. Waves crashing over the sides. Staring up at the steel hull of a German U-boat surfaced in the darkness. No backup. No extraction plan. Just 5 British commandos, salt water soaking through their gear, about to attempt something that would be called suicide if anyone knew they were out here. The U-boat's crew had no idea what was coming. They thought they were alone, running on the surface to recharge batteries, radar sweeping for Allied convoys. They were hunting. They didn't know they'd become the prey. What happened in the next 47 minutes would change the course of the war in the Atlantic. It would crack open Nazi Germany's most closely guarded secrets, and would send shockwaves all the way to Stalin's desk in Moscow, triggering a diplomatic crisis that nearly fractured the Allied alliance. This is a story of Operation Primrose, the mission so classified that some of the men involved didn't learn what they'd actually captured until decades after the war ended. The mission where 5 commandos seized a fully operational Nazi U-boat, pulled off the intelligence coup of the century, and accidentally created an international incident that had Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin in emergency communication for weeks. But here's what makes this story truly stunning. It almost didn't happen, and when it did, nobody was supposed to know about it, ever. Let me take you back to how 5 ordinary men pulled off the extraordinary, and why Stalin absolutely lost his mind when he found out. To understand why this capture mattered so much, you need to understand what was happening in the North Atlantic in early 1944. German U-boats were slaughtering Allied shipping. Thousands of tons of supplies, food, fuel, ammunition, troops, were ending up at the bottom of the ocean every single day. The wolf pack tactics were devastating. U-boats would surface at night, coordinate attacks through encrypted radio messages, then disappear beneath the waves before destroyers could respond. The Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and if they lost the Atlantic, they'd lose the war. D-Day was being planned for June, but you can't invade Europe if you can't get your troops and supplies across the ocean. Every convoy that went down meant the invasion got pushed back, gave Hitler more time to fortify the Atlantic Wall, increased the odds that the entire war effort would collapse. The British had made progress breaking German naval codes through the brilliant work at Bletchley Park. But there was a problem. The Germans kept upgrading their Enigma machines. New rotors, new protocols, new codebooks. Every few months, the code breakers would go blind again, scrambling to catch up while U-boats operated with impunity. What the Allies desperately needed was a fully intact, operational U-boat with its Enigma machine codebooks and operational orders still on board. Not a damaged submarine scuttled by its crew, not pieces recovered from the ocean floor. They needed the real thing, captured so quickly the Germans didn't have time to destroy the sensitive materials. That's where Operation Primrose came in. And that's where 5 commandos were about to make history. The 5 men in that dinghy weren't selected randomly. They were Royal Navy boarding specialists, men trained for the absolute worst-case scenarios. Lieutenant Commander David Baum led the team. At 20 years old, he was the oldest. The others ranged from 17 to 19. Think about that for a moment. Teenagers, essentially, tasked with boarding a hostile submarine in the middle of the night, in rough seas, with no backup, against a crew of 45 German sailors who would absolutely fight to the death rather than allow their boat to be captured. The plan was born from desperation and opportunity. HMS Bulldog, a British destroyer, had depth charged U-110 until it was forced to surface, heavily damaged but not destroyed. The German crew began abandoning ship, following standard protocol, set scuttling charges, destroy all classified materials, then evacuate. But Commander Joe Baker Creswell of the Bulldog saw something the Germans didn't realize. The scuttling charges hadn't detonated properly. The U-boat was flooding, but slowly. It might stay afloat for another hour, maybe more. That's when he made the call that would change everything. Instead of finishing off the submarine with gunfire, standard procedure, he ordered the boarding party deployed. 5 men, 1 chance. Get aboard before the sub sank or the Germans realized what was happening and came back to destroy it themselves. Baum and his team had no idea what they'd find inside. Booby traps? Armed Germans still aboard? A boat about to go down any second. Trapping them inside a steel coffin? They grabbed bolt cutters, sidearms, and flashlights. Then they started climbing. The ladder up the side of U-110's conning tower was slick with seawater and oil. Baum went first, his heart hammering, expecting at any moment to hear shouts in German or feel bullets ripping through him. Nothing, just the sound of waves and the groaning of damaged metal. He reached the top of the conning tower and looked down into the submarine's interior. Darkness, water sloshing around inside, emergency lighting flickering, and something that made his blood freeze. Papers floating everywhere. Code books, charts, documents the Germans had tried to throw overboard, but hadn't had time to properly destroy. Baum signaled his team. They descended into the submarine, moving through the narrow corridors with flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every step. They expected the boat to lurch and begin its final plunge to the bottom. Every shadow could be a German sailor hiding with a weapon. Every sound could be bulkheads collapsing. But the submarine was abandoned. The crew, panicked and convinced the boat was going down any second, had evacuated so quickly they'd left everything behind. And everything included the intelligence goldmine the Allies had been desperate for. In the radio room, Baum found it. The Enigma machine fully intact. Beside it, the current code books, settings for the entire month, operational orders, grid references for other U-boat positions. Everything. His hands were shaking as he carefully gathered materials. One of his team members whispered, "Sir, the boat's listing. We need to go." But Baum kept working methodically. Code books into waterproof bags. The Enigma machine wrapped in oilcloth. Charts documenting German naval operations across the entire Atlantic. He knew, they all knew, that this was bigger than their lives. If they went down with this intelligence, thousands of Allied sailors and soldiers would die because convoy routes couldn't be protected. They worked for 40 minutes inside that dying submarine. 40 minutes that felt like hours, passing materials up through the conning tower to the dinghy, racing against rising water and the structural integrity of a boat that could implode at any second. Finally, Baum made the call. "That's everything we can carry. Move. Now." They climbed out, loaded the dinghy until it was dangerously low in the water, and rowed back to the Bulldog. Behind them, U-110 finally gave up its fight with the sea and slipped beneath the waves. The 5 Commandos had done the impossible. They'd captured Nazi Germany's secrets. And now came the truly difficult part, keeping the capture completely secret. Here's where the story takes a geopolitical turn that almost nobody knows about. The intelligence from U-110 was immediately classified at the highest levels. Ultra secret, above top secret. Churchill personally ordered that even most military commanders couldn't know the source of the sudden improvement in convoy protection. The Germans absolutely could not discover that their Enigma system had been compromised, or they'd change everything and the Allies would go blind again. For months, it worked perfectly. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park used to capture materials to read German naval communications in near real time. Convoys were routed around wolf packs. U-boats found themselves ambushed instead of ambushing. The Battle of the Atlantic slowly turned in the Allies' favor. But then Stalin found out. Soviet intelligence, operating within British military circles, caught wind of the capture, and Stalin was furious, not because the operation happened, but because he was informed. The Soviets were dying by the millions on the Eastern Front, receiving crucial supplies through Arctic convoys protected by intelligence derived from U-110. And nobody had told Stalin how the Allies were suddenly so effective at protecting those shipments. Stalin saw it as proof that the Western Allies didn't trust the Soviet Union, that they were keeping war-winning intelligence to themselves. He demanded full disclosure of all intelligence sources and methods, threatening to reconsider Soviet cooperation on multiple fronts. Churchill and Roosevelt found themselves in an impossible position. Tell Stalin everything and risk Soviet security leaks that could alert the Germans, or refuse and watch the alliance crack apart. The resulting diplomatic crisis stayed classified for decades. Operation Primrose, the capture of U-110 and its Enigma materials, remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets for over 3 decades. The Commandos who risked their lives at night were sworn to absolute secrecy. Some went to their graves never telling their own families what they'd done. But historians now recognize it as one of the single most important intelligence operations of World War II. The materials captured from U-110 gave Bletchley Park the breakthrough they needed to systematically read German naval communications for months. Thousands of Allied lives were saved. D-Day became possible because troops and supplies could safely cross the Atlantic. David Baum, the 20-year-old lieutenant who led the boarding party, lived until 2016. In later interviews, he remained humble about his role, insisting he'd simply done his duty. But naval historians credit him and his 4 teammates with changing the course of history. 5 men, 1 rubber dinghy. 47 minutes of extraordinary courage. They boarded an enemy submarine that could have sunk at any moment, seized Nazi Germany's most valuable secrets, and triggered a diplomatic earthquake that reached all the way to Stalin's desk. And for 30 years, the world had no idea it had even happened. That's the stunning capture of U-110, a mission so secret. Even its success had to stay hidden.